So Dan, how did for the second time? Well, here let's talk about that first because I'm gonna go with.
Are we gonna explain to people why there's a mic in my mouth?
Well, no, I'm gonna go with with. Why are we doing this interview again? What do you think when I told you?
Well, you mean why are we doing it from your end, or why are we doing it from my end?
Well, my end basically. And then we can also explain.
This is the 17th or 18th time that you've attempted to interview me about the 411 This Isn't Me record.
Yes.
I give us a 50-50 chance of pulling it off this time. From my end, this is a mic test, which is why I'm worried more about the audio than the visual, and I have a giant black booger hanging in front of my face.
How did 411 come together?
So 411 was an interesting thing. Al Quint had planned to do a series of 7-inches in Suburban Voice fanzine, and he didn't care if they were studio projects or what they were, right? And somehow Smalley's name came up, and Dag Nasty Can I Say I've considered to be a high water mark in all of hardcore vocal performances and so forth. I'm a little preoccupied with the mic. I apologize. Anyway, and so I immediately started thinking, who could do sort of a Dag Nasty type sounding, maybe with a little more attack or a little more of a sort of a DIY rawness to it type thing. Give me a couple songs quick that I could then submit to Dave and see if he would want to duet any of them with me, and I could snatch up this opportunity to have a 7-inch in Suburban Voice. I didn't want to do it with Carrie Nation, who had plenty of access to putting out our own stuff, and I didn't, No For an Answer was a thing of the past. So it was intended as a project, but when I heard the songs that Kevin Murphy got, that was what I ended up going to, I liked them so much. I was like, no, this needs to be a band, and Dave can do some backing vocals. I'm not gonna duet this or split this with him. I want to build from this.
Given that Kevin Murphy had played drums in Head First, how'd you know that he could play guitar?
I think I saw him messing around on it somewhere and realized that's kind of an untapped resource there. But I didn't know, like absolutely no, until I heard the cassette of those two songs. And what's interesting about this is I'm imagining Kevin watching this, right? And it could be that after 30 some odd years, I'm getting key elements of this wrong. Like I've come to realize that a lot of this retrospective stuff that we do, we end up telling the story as we remember it, and sometimes we're full of shit. But this is how I remember it. It could have been that I was exposed to him on guitar in another way. It could have been that he had those songs and they fit my need rather than him creating it for him, but I really don't know.
So where did you record that 7-inch? Was that done at West Beach?
Yes, actually it was.
Okay. And those first two songs, those homophobic thoughts that feed the fire, they feel not rushed, but they feel just, there's an energy to them that I think that you would agree is there. Why do you feel that those songs have that energy? Is it because it was
there's two different things. First off, there's an interesting parallel when you say that, because if you compare the No For an Answer 7-inch to the No For an Answer 12-inch, there's a similar weight gain and larding out that occurs between those two releases. And we always felt like the 411 LP came out sounding kind of bloated compared to the 7-inch. So I don't know whether that's this, young bands get in the studio and learn the toys and obsess about how to improve upon the first one, and actually in the end, 10 years later, they look at it and go, wow, we really shot ourselves in the foot. Or in the case of the 411 7-inch, West Beach was two entirely different buildings during that recording. 7-inch was recorded at the original spot. The 12-inch was recorded at the new one. 7-inch was engineered by and produced by Brett Gurewitz from Bad Religion. The second one in the new building was done by Donald Cameron, who was kind of their house guy.
Was the first one done
different buildings and different engineers, so they weren't going to sound the same.
Was the first West Beach a house? Why do I think that?
It seemed like every recording studio back then was a house, which was kind of great. Radio Tokyo was a house. A lot of places were.
Gotcha. And now look, now we're doing this, and we're doing it from our houses.
Yeah, me and my 8 chins and my microphone eye are just, DIY as all hell.
All right. Could you have known when you did Face the Flag, that years later, we're looking like 1990, 1991, that's what you were writing about, the first war in Iraq, that, a decade later, we would be back in there again. And then, I mean, it's even more so now because you look at what's happening in Afghanistan and all that stuff.
There's a lot of content on that album that translates alarmingly well, because anything that is about social and political mores and sort of the downside of society, you would hope would age out and become obsolete. And instead, most of that record has not. That said, Face the Flag, which is the song that you just mentioned in that question, I had just cleared the existing draft age at the time. I wasn't going to go if they reinstituted the draft. Both of the Stanton brothers would have, and I used to hang out with Josh and Scott Stanton every day, and I was horrified at the notion of them going over there basically to fight for oil. That song, it's still the same war, but people lost fear that war was going to involve the draft decades ago. So that song is standing in a slightly different space. Those homophobic, well, yeah, a little bit, don't ask, don't tell, went the way of the dodo. Same-sex marriage is still an ongoing fight in some places, which is horrifying to me. The just carte blanche that people had to use homophobic references playfully seems to at least be gone in the media. So there's progress on those fronts, but there's still plenty of sexuality-based hate out there. The ones that are really interesting to me are any of the ones that sort of have to do with hate or just division or just toxicity between human beings or with government overreach, like Blackout. Those things are alarmingly relevant even in the Biden administration. Not that Biden exactly trends left, but the 411 members were talking about actually playing together during Trump, because Trump could have been the frickin' cover of that record. That man's mindset and the mindset of the overwhelming majority of Trump voters were just alarmingly in sync with everything we hated.
Was 411 the one band that I think you told me, you maybe even said this in an interview or something, that it's the one band that you would have no problem and have no second thoughts in your mind about doing a reunion today?
Is that the band that because I think it could have total and complete social relevance? Yeah, it's the only reunion that interests me, that actually occupies space between my ears.
Gotcha.
And it hopefully will become less so. Despite any romance about the music, its social motivations will hopefully fade as the culture matures, but who fucking knows?
Right. Well, I mean, you would have thought that when you did it 30-something years ago that that the things like you said that are still alarming you aren't still alarming you.
At the risk of sounding like I'm name dropping, this conversation reminds me very much of a conversation I had with Vic Bondi from Articles of Faith. And what's interesting is while I'm talking to you, I'm feeling different than when the last time I talked to Mario about all this, which was when I talked to Mario. We talked about how relevant all this was, right?
Mm-hmm.
As I'm talking to you and giving examples, I'm realizing that several of the situations attacked on that record are not as severe as they were then. Like when I was giving my illustrations, they're sort of about homophobia. Just the things that I mentioned that were progress, that were fence posts towards progress, those aren't things to be trivialized. And so it reminds me of when I asked Bondi if things were worse than when we were kids and then during Nixon and everything else. And he talked about, that he had a relative who could be out and not live in fear and who could, pursue her relationship publicly. And, you just talked about all these different freedoms that didn't exist in his youth. And while these hates exist, and so it's still good to sing about them, I will say I'm forced to acknowledge that there has been growth.
Now,
if you're in the save the world self-righteous business, acknowledging growth is a real pain in the ass. But anyway, if it's true, it's true.